Hello, welcome. Okay, so this is the re-recording of the one light techniques. Thank you all for joining. My name's Bridget. I've been working as a photographer for a little over 8 years in New York City. Before that, I was pursuing my degree, my BFA in photography at Savannah College of Art and Design, and I've pretty much had a camera in my hands since I was 12 years old. After college, I took the advice of my professors and continued mentors and tried to find my niche, but I had to go through a lot of different genres and work through different types of photography. I've gotten to work New York Fashion Week in front and behind the scenes of the runway. I've helped businesses brand with photos and headshots and work for their websites. I've done a lot of weddings, events, bar bat mitzvahs, and all through that, I loved photography. I loved it when I got to take photos of music shows, and I realized that the consistent thread and where I wanted to try to build my niche was in the enjoyment of creating and helping others catch that spark of wanting to take photos and enjoy the process. Right now, I've been focusing on the past year on fine art and conceptual photography, and that relies heavily on storytelling, but so do all the other types of photography that you do. You're trying to express what you're thinking, how you're reacting to the scene in front of you, what you're seeing, and it's your own perspective. I've always found that I could visually tell a story or express what I was thinking better than I could with words verbally or written down. And a big part of photography is working with light, right? Photography, break it down, photo means light, graphy means study of or written part, and we've taken this to mean photography is the study of light or drawing with light, painting with light, because that's exactly what light is for us as photographers. It's our medium. It says paint to painters. Light is the photographer's paint. And this is really basic, right? I'm going to talk about my techniques. I'm talking about the basic ways we manipulate light. I'm going to talk about some fundamental qualities of light. The three main characteristics for me are the distance, they are the shape, and they are the intensity of the light. So we're going to go through those, and I will talk about one setup, Rembrandt lighting, because that's a one light setup, and it's very common and something we can learn when we start to work with light. I am going to stick to just continuous light for this demo, but know that what I'm talking about when I talk about diffusion, when I talk about shaping, when I talk about reflecting, you can do that with a strobe. It's just you're not going to be able to see it as you're taking the photo, right? You can't preview it because the strobe's going to go off in a flash, but that's okay. It'll be fun for us to experiment. And then I'll wrap up and I'll talk to you about steps to move forward, full transparency. I don't really have an upsell for you other than I'd like you to join my Facebook group that I've started, Imperfect Photography. And right now it's just a community. I am working on getting more courses, longer length courses together. But if you stick around in the Facebook group, you'll hear about them. Okay, so let's get started. All right, lighting basics. Okay, so the three main characteristics of light are the distance to the subject, the shape of the light, and the intensity or amount of light. These all determine the quality of light, whether it's hard or soft, and how the light best emphasizes or enhances your subject. Remember that light travels in waves or rays or beams, right? We're only seeing the light as it reflects off an object. So the distance to the subject is what I'm going to talk about first. And the farther away from the subject, the harder the light will be. And the closer, the softer the light will appear. Hard and soft refers to the value change between the brightest and the darkest part of an image. The spread of light is greater if you have your light further away. So less of the light will hit your subject. So just think about that in terms of intensity, right? So like if I move closer to my light source over here, you see my skin really blowing up. The highlights are getting blown out, right? It's too bright. But I'm backing away and I'm getting a little bit of this shadow on my nose. All right, so we're switching screens now. And I'm going to demonstrate with this little still life that I made. Oh, forgive my focusing. And it's just a little still life of some s'more ingredients. But with the different values, I thought this would help demonstrate a few concepts. So I'm going to move my light and I'll show you how the shadows change, right? Because that's what we're really going to look at. All right, so I'm moving the light. Now I'm getting further away, it's getting darker. Then I move it close and it gets brighter. But look at the shadows. Look at how the shadows are changing. Further away. And getting closer. What's happening when I move further away, yes, it's getting a tiny bit darker, but you see more shadow and more texture coming up on those marshmallows. That's the harder light. All right, so moving on, we're going to go to the shape of the light. And the shape of the light source and modifier, right, depending on if you have one on it, is going to determine the shape. Why does the shape matter? One, it's going to matter in terms of how much spread you have. And like I said, the spread will allow your light, regardless of distance, to kind of soften a little bit more and travel. Think of the spread as how much freedom the light beams have to travel outside of a straight line. So a modifier that is changing from a square to a bigger square or to an umbrella is helping the light push out, and it can make it a little bit more even if you have it further away. The shape of the light will reveal itself in the highlights and catch lights. Catch lights are a specific highlight that you would see in the pupil of a person if you're taking a portrait or even in an animal's eye. And what's really cool is that if you zoom in onto these photos where there is that catch light, you can actually sometimes see the shape of the modifiers and then deconstruct the lighting setup that was used for that photo. And you can also do that with some other highlights and shadows. You can shape the highlight of your subject to really enhance it, which is another reason why you might want to shape your light with a modifier. If you use a very oblong softbox, so it's like a rectangle rather than a square, your highlight's going to be a long line, and that's great if you have like a tall glass bottle, so you get the highlight down the entire side and not just on the top. Cars used to always shoot with very long oblong soft boxes kind of on top to get those long lines, those long highlights to show off the curves of the body. And the last of the qualities of light is the intensity. So intensity refers to the amount of power the light has. And your light's going to have your light's going to have some sort of power output, right? So if it's continuous, if it's just a light bulb from your lamp, there's a certain power amount there, right? It's 60 watts, 100 watts. Your LEDs are going to have a little bit more power than your tungsten or fluorescent bulbs. And then your strobes, because they're kind of saving all their energy for that one punch of light, they're going to have even more power, right? So you can get more light out of that one shot than continuous. Whether it's the sun, the lamp, an LED, how bright is the light on its own? Now, some lights, like an LED or the strobe, you can adjust the power. You can say, hey, I need you to output at 100%, so like all 600 watts at one punch rather than the 200 or 100, okay? You can add more lights to increase the power. If you can't turn up the controls on your light. But you can also change the power of the light by cutting the light, right? If you're out in the sun and you need to get your scene darker, you can use a diffuser or stand in the shade to cut the power of the light. Now, how do you know if the light's too much or not enough? Well, all of our cameras have this tool inside called a light meter. You can also buy external ones, and those are really good if you are doing a lot of studio work and you need to be very particular and using multiple lights. And they're fun to play with, but you don't really need one unless you're gonna move up and advance that direction in photography. But we all have a light meter inside of our camera, and we can change the metering process to get more specific results. Don't feel like you have to use it though. There's nothing wrong with taking a picture, looking down and seeing if that's the exposure you want. And also with mirrorless, as well as like on your smartphones or on a point and shoot, you're pretty much previewing your exposure right there. It's on DSLRs that through the viewfinder or the live screen. Well, no, I guess usually it's just through the viewfinder that you wouldn't be able to see exactly what your exposure is, or if you're using strobes, right? Because you can't. We get good at guessing, and through a light meter, we can choose what power we need to set our strobe at, as well as our camera settings, but we won't see the preview just looking through the viewfinder if we're using strobe lighting, right? So sometimes a light meter is beneficial there. A light meter can also be beneficial if you can't take your eye off the action. If you're at your kid's soccer game and they're running down the field and the clouds are moving, you know, over the sun, cutting in and out, you might need to change your exposure on the fly. The light meter is going to help you if you don't have it on a semi-automated or automated function. Your camera is using the light meter automatically when it's on auto, and even your phone is using the light meter to kind of set the automatic settings. A neutral exposure, what those auto settings are going for, is meant to read as close to the naked eye's perception as possible. Okay, so switching over to the preview, I'm going to move this little square here. This is where I'm setting my focus point. But this is also going to come in handy when I change the metering mode of my camera. So there's a few different metering modes most cameras have, and it's evaluative, or that's taking the average of everything that we see on the viewfinder or the preview. There's center weighted, so it'll focus on the center, the value in the middle of the picture, and determine the correct exposure or neutral exposure off of that. And then there's spot metering. And spot metering is where you can pick what value you want to expose for, whether you want to expose for the really bright part, or if you want to expose for the really dark part, or somewhere in between. Maybe you definitely want to get that chocolate at the perfect exposure, but you don't care if the marshmallows get blown out or whatnot. You can set your spot meter reading. You can set your camera to spot meter reading so that you know what it is determining as the perfect, quote unquote, the neutral exposure for that part of your image. So that evaluative metering, if we have these stark differences in value, like the really white marshmallow, that's automatically, it's going to reflect more light, so it's already going to be brighter compared to the brown of the chocolate with a black background. There's a really stark difference. So if we use evaluative metering, we're going to get a reading that says the image is too dark. Now, how I know we're getting a reading where the image is too dark, on the left-hand side, that line graph that goes from -3 to +3, that's the light meter. On the negative side, it's saying it's too dark, So if it's -1, it's 1 stop too dark, and right now it looks like it's on -2. So my camera thinks this is 2 stops too dark, that I need to let in 2 more stops of light in order to get it brighter. Oh, and see, and then it just changed. It's changing now because I'm changing my metering function. So I'm going from evaluative to spot, and because I'm really hitting like that marshmallow and the lighter wood board, now my camera says, okay, you know what, you're actually just a little bit too bright. You're about half a stop too bright, right? The 1, the 2, the 3, those are on the positive side, so that's saying we have too much light. Negative side, not enough light, too dark. Positive side, too much light, bright. And then you'll see as I move my focus point, like I moved it up to just on the white marshmallow, and the little tick moved up to 1. So it's not just half a stop too bright, it's now a full stop too bright. But I'm going to be honest, looking at this preview here, and you see if I go on the black background, it's not even registering on the light meter because it's just too dark. Okay, so coming down, there we are. Okay, so there we are. So they're coming down where I'm getting a little bit of the white, a little bit of the black. It's saying I'm a stop too dark, but that's because there's multiple values in that little square box. So it's trying to give me what it thinks will be the best reading, right? It's trying to tell me what I should do with my settings, my manual settings, to get the best exposure. So right now, because it's telling me it's too dark, what I should do is I should either open my aperture, so go down to like 5.6 or something, or slow my shutter speed, so go from 125th of a second to maybe 100. And that way I get more light in and it's not that dark. Now you may want to use spot metering to figure out an exposure if you're trying to get a silhouette, right? So you have a really bright background, but you want your foreground, either your person or different subject, to be dark. You should try to expose for the background so you can set your focus point onto the background, and you can set your settings so that it reads at a neutral exposure, and then anything that's in front, not in that light of the background, so I'm thinking, you know, person inside in front of a window, that will be dark, and that way you can guarantee a silhouette. All right, so techniques. Again, I'm going over the 3 really basic techniques. How to modify lights, artificial or natural. You talk about position, diffusion, and reflection. So starting with position, this is more than just the distance between the light and the subject. You know, this is the light in front of your subject? Is it behind it, to the side? Where are your shadows going to fall? Your shadows will fall on the opposite side of your subject from where the light is. It's common to talk in angles to the subject or use clock hand positioning, right? So think about your light could be at 10 or 2 o'clock from the model. It could be at photographer's right, photographer's left, or 45 degrees from the model, 45 degrees from the camera, 60 degrees. Those are going to be very common ways for photographers and their assistants to describe where they want the light in relation to either themselves, the camera, or the model. Now, if your light source isn't in your command, right, it's not a strobe, it's not an LED, let's say it's the sun, or that your subject can't move, your subject's not in your command, use the photographer can move, right? So if you are photographing outside in the park and you're with your sister, let's say, you can bring your sister, you can turn her around so that the sun is behind her, but if it's behind her, her face is going to be in shadow, Her face will be darker. So then you can turn her around so that way she's looking at the sun, but then she might get a little squinty. And then, or you can turn her to the side, right? And I see this a lot if you're on a webcam meeting and you're sitting in front of a window and the webcam's looking at you with the window behind you and you're completely blown out. That's why, because the light's behind you and it's putting you in shadow. So just turn to the side. Or better yet, don't use a window at all and just go in a different room. Okay, so switching over to the live feed again, I'm just going to quickly move the light. And what you'll want to pay attention to is the position of the shadow, where it goes, how intense it is, and then also kind of think about what makes these subjects look good. Now, I kind of like the light here. It's okay, but the marshmallows are a little flat. This is starting off, the light is starting off about 45 degrees, looking at the scene to photographer's left. But I think it's doing a decent job. The shadows have an interesting shape on the board. But like I said, I think the marshmallows are a little flat. So I'm going I'm going to zoom back in a hot second. Okay. Yep. All right. I want to zoom out a little bit. Just so you can see the movement of the light a little easier. Okay, so I'm going to start to move it. I'm moving it from 45 degrees over to about 90 degrees and going even a little bit behind, right? So the shadows are going to fall in the opposite direction of the light, like I said. So if I just rotate around, completely go to the other side, this is in the front. The marshmallows look really blown out. This is kind of coming from overhead. So the shadows are underneath the subjects, but I kind of like we're getting more texture. And then now we're moving back to 45 degrees. So you would want to think about how the light hit your subject and where you found it to be the most flattering. Before I move on, the position of the light. Right now, on myself as a person, just to give us a different example, the light is coming probably maybe 15 to 20, and these are all rough estimates, but it's not quite 45 degrees. It's not 3/3 or 3/4. I'd say it's like 15 to 20 degrees from the camera, right? And so it's hitting me. It's got a pretty good spread on both sides of my face, and the shadow isn't too big. It's not like it's a whole black half of my face, right? Like there's even light, and I have just a tiny bit of definition under my chin. So it's a good angle there, but if had I moved it right in front, I'd have no shadow, so not a lot of shape. Too far, really contrasting shapes, maybe even a little unflattering under the eyes. Okay, diffusion. So diffusion occurs when we have light travel through a material that blocks part, not all, of the light. And the light beams will spread further from each other, creating a softer light, okay? Because the diffusion is kind of, it's disrupting that straight path. So when the light goes through, like a sheer cloth, something usually white, semi-translucent, some of the light's going through, but the rest of the light beams are hitting it and bouncing back, and then they're going back to the light source, and then they're trying to bounce through again. Some more of them make it through, but not all. So then those little stragglers go back, try for a third time, etc. So it's bouncing all around, and the diffusion is kind of creating a bigger spread. And like I said, this is also how you're going to affect the spread, and the spread will affect the softness even if you have the light source further back. You can even use a diffuser outside with the sun. If you have a reflector, like a 5-in-1 reflector, it's pretty common for the center piece to actually be translucent material. If you don't want to buy the reflector from a photo store, because they can get a little pricey, you can make a diffusion scrim. The scrim is what we would call that filter of the sheer fabric to put over the light. And you can make a diffusion scrim. Just get a plastic shower liner, a white one, from the dollar store or Target or whatever. And you can hold that up or put it on a frame, put it on a hula hoop, and you can use that as a diffuser. Or some other fabric, right? Maybe you have linen or cheesecloth, you know, or a white button-up shirt you don't wear anymore. You can use that for the light to go through and make a diffusion a softer light. Diffusion will also cut out the amount of light, like I said. So just be prepared. You may have to adjust your settings to compensate for less light coming through. Now I'm going to demonstrate diffusion really quickly, and what you should look at is you should look at the edges of the shadow. Okay? If you are looking at the edges of the shadow, right now on that little wood board, that carving board, the shadows of the marshmallows, that's a very distinct, it's a crisp shape. Okay? It's a tiny bit fuzzy. Okay, now I'm pulling out the diffuser, and I'm going to zoom out just real quick so I can kind of show you the size and scope and explain to you what I'm using. This is part of my 5-in-1 reflector, but I'm specifically going to use the internal disc. That is the diffusion. So hold on. That's popping out right now. Zooming out. And there you go. You kind of see it. I know we're zoomed out a little bit, right? So that's the internal part, and then I have that cover over it to reflect light, which we'll talk about next. But that interior, it's semi see-through, and that's what I'm going to use to put in front of the light. All right, zoomed back in. Now look at the shadows and how they're going to change once I put up the diffuser. Okay, so first off, we see it's the scene overall is getting a little bit darker. So I'll try to bump up the exposure for you, but look at the edges of the shadows. Boom, see, compared without, no diffusion. Now we put it back on. We can see the shadows are diminishing a bit, and also the line furthest back is getting fuzzier, right? I can move the scrim so it's further away from the light source or closer. And that'll change the edge of the shadow. So moving on from diffusion to reflection. Reflection is going to bounce light back towards the subject, okay? So if we're already using a light source, we're typically using this to fill in shadows, right? And anything that reflects light rather than absorbs light can be used, okay? So think lighter colors. So you can use white, you can use pink, you can use a really light gray, but something like a black, a maroon, navy blue, that's going to absorb light and that's not going to throw light back on to your subject, okay? And like I said, if you don't want to buy a reflector, you don't have to. You can use things as a reflector. White foam core, tin foil on cardboard. I have this blue, like electric blue plastic storage bin lid, and I like backing that with tin foil because then I can get a little bit more reflection, right? Because silver is more reflective than just white. But it also is going to cast like a blue light into my subject, and so it's just a easy way to be a little bit more creative. Now, let's say you did want to get very dramatic and take light away from your subject, like make your shadows darker. You could use a black scrim, or not a scrim, a black flag is what we would call it, like a black foam core, black fabric, because then it's going to stop any light that was reflecting back into your scene, okay? Now, in this webcam over here, I actually have my reflector hanging up. If I can get it in the shot. So I'm using that to fill in this part of my face, right? So if I didn't have it here, right, I'm going to rotate it away so it's not facing me. So if I didn't have the reflector here, you can see right away the change. So this is a very dark shadow. I have this whole shadow on this half of my face. It's cutting in under here, right? No texture in my hair. But if I wiggle it back, swing it back, right, there we go. Now look at that. Shadows, not that noticeable. And I have this, it's not just a black line down the side of my face, right? It's a lot better. So now that I've gone through reflections, I'm going to try to demonstrate Rembrandt lighting, right? The way I need to do that, you know what? Now, I like this reflector. It's the 5-in-1 reflector, and I'm just going to show it off a bit. Not for any particular reason other than I do think if you are going to get some lighting equipment, a reflector actually might be a better place to start than buying a light, because you can use the reflector with what you already have. If you have the clamp lights from Home Depot or, just lamps around your house, the reflector might be a good place to start, because then you can kind of learn more about how light is reflecting and bouncing off, and more about the diffusion, right? Because you can use that inner panel. So what's cool about this is I have silver on one side, and on the opposite side of this silver cover, on one side I have white, right? In here is the translucent, right? Because you can kind of see my fingers. And then on the other, come here, little guy. On the other interior, I have gold. And gold's really reflective, but it's gonna, instead of casting that silver, it it kind of reflects back that gold, that yellow tint. And then we also have a flag, right, or meaning a black side. And what the black side is going to do is, come on, flip around, there you go. If I was using the black side instead of the silver side, right, see it's, you know, it's acting like there's no reflector at all. But if I move it even closer to me, well, honestly, I can't see that much change. But basically, like, it's keeping the shadows pretty dark, right? So if I move my light a little bit, woo, like, I'm not getting any light on that one side of my face. It's completely dark. This is like Phantom of the Opera-esque, you know? It's very different from using the silver or the white reflector. Okay. Now I just pulled this light from about that 15 degrees, almost 90 degrees. It's pretty much to my right, but it's a tiny bit in front of me, which is perfect for what we're going to try to do next. Rembrandt lighting. Okay, so like I said, this is the one light technique. This is where doing this little read recording is a bit better because we're going to nail it. Rembrandt lighting is a one light formula. Your light's either going to be somewhere between 45 to 90 degrees, typically closer to 90 degrees, but it'll depend on how you're feeling that day when you're taking the photo with your subject and also how the subject's features play with the light. It's referring to the painter Rembrandt's style of light. And a big notable characteristic is that on the side with the shadow, we're going to try to make a little triangle, okay? So I think, right, as I turn my face towards the light, this gets, you can see it more, you can see my whole face. So what we're going to do is we're going to use a reflector with the light to just bounce a tiny bit back in. Still kind of keep this gorgeous moody lighting, but just add a tiny bit more highlight so that way we can see more detail in the face, okay? 45 degrees from your subject, like a 3/4, is a good place to start, but like I said, you typically will bring it closer to 90. It will depend on what you like, how your backdrop exposes, how your subject's facial features go, etc. So I have two examples here. The photo's not mine. I borrowed it from Westcott Learning Universities as an example of their Rembrandt, and that's even a little bit more diffused, I would say, and not as stark as, let's say, the painting over on the left-hand side, which is one of Rembrandt's paintings. But you see that little triangle under the shadow side of the face? There's just a little bit of highlight on that cheekbone, okay? Right now on the webcam, you can see I get a tiny bit of light down here by my lip, but we want to try to get it up here on my cheekbone. So we're going to use a reflector to achieve that, okay? So right now I have it, it's still on the black side, so I got to turn that around. I'm going to start with silver to see how it goes. Oh, right now, right away, just having the silver kind of directly across from the light, it's filling in, but it's filling in a lot. It's almost an even ratio. You might hear that when we talk about lighting figures or lighting diagrams, ratios of light. So your key light meaning your main light, and for me it's my little video light over here, because that's my one light source, but it is also my main light. It's hitting my right side of the face. You're seeing it as your left. This is my right side of the face. It's hitting this, and I have the reflector over here, and they're pretty much like, if I brought them close together, they'd kiss and then spread back apart. I need to move my reflector so it's not hitting my face this much, right? I also need to try to move it so that it's aiming the light back up here, because I'm still getting most of the shadow where I want there to be the highlight. All right. So, if I move now, I'm moving it a little bit in front, so that's already changing the light as well, right? Okay. This is getting pretty close to the painter, but I still think it's too bright here. I want my shadow a little darker. Hold on. Now the reflector, that's pretty close. It's just my nose. Typically, when you are doing this, you do have a big diffusion, a big modifier on your light source, right? So we're using a bigger light source compared to our subject, and because that one is going to soften it. And two, you really do need more of a spread for the Rembrandt, right? So typically you have a bigger modifier. My light is 1 foot. It's 1 foot across. It's not a big light. So I should be using a bigger modifier if I want to do this easily, but it can be done. So hold on. I'm going to adjust the angle of my light a tiny bit. I'm bringing it back. It's probably like at 80, right? And I'm doing that just to bring a little bit more light to the side of the face already, but also to play with how it's going to hit the direction of the light and how it's going to hit the reflector. Right, so I'm kind of, the reflector is now to my left, right? If I extend my hand out, the reflector is to my left, and it's facing me, pretty much. I think if I do that, because that's where your reflector should be for it. And look, I'm getting that highlight, but it's just, it's too low. Okay, so that's coming, so I'm turning away my reflector. I can see this highlight, sorry, this highlight is coming from the light over here. So I can do one of two things. I can move my light up to try to get the highlight to hit here, or I can try messing with the reflector. I'm going to do a little bit of both. So I'm going to try to raise my reflector. If I can do it. That's pretty much my light, my reflector's as high as it's going to go. I can come down a little bit. And then my light, we're going to angle down. Hold on. Okay. Pretty good. Okay. Getting back in here. Now this is pretty good. I think I like the difference. I like having this, oh, there, tiny bit. We're getting that tiny little triangle. If I can fill this in, ooh, it'd be so good. So good. And again, it will depend a little bit on my positioning, right? Like we even see in the painting, the head's a little off. So let me try, I'm going to move my light so maybe it's hitting the reflector a bit more. Instead of me, all right. Okay, so this is turning the light away from me a little bit. but now it's pretty even. So I'm not getting that, because I'm just getting the spread. I'm getting the end of the light. So now it's pretty even. It's not as dramatic. Hold on, we're going to do this. We're going to get this. This is why it's exciting to pretend to be live / pretend to be live. Okay. So what I would do, if I think I'm going to go back and I'm going to pull the light about 90 degrees from me. Come here. I'll stop in a few minutes if I can't get it, because I think it's probably getting a little boring for you to just see the light move without really seeing what I'm doing. And unfortunately, I can't pull back the camera that much at this time. All right. So I can move a little bit back. And we're gonna pull this light down a smidgen again. All right, there we go. Let's pull this reflector in. Oh, it's coming. Do you see that? Hold on. Do you see that? We're getting that. We're getting it. Oh, yeah. Yep. I like this. My hair's falling off to the background, but I don't care. Love it. It's moody. A little dramatic. We got our little cheekbone highlight. Right? Because if I don't have the reflector at all, I still get it a little bit. Right? But it's not as much. And I slowly turn the reflector so it's facing me. We're filling in a little bit more of the shadow. But with that too, yeah, that's it. Yes, there it is. I like this. This is what I would like for Rembrandt on myself. Right? Okay. So reflector. Oh, come here. There we go. Yeah, keeping my head turned slightly so that the shadows meet, and then using this reflector to really just fill it in a bit more so it's not so different. Okay. All right. So, thank you. Wrap up what to do next. Think about what were your key takeaways from this class. What did you learn? There's a lot of things we didn't talk about because this was meant as an introduction. So we didn't talk about all modifiers like snoots, honeycomb. We didn't really talk about troubleshooting because I couldn't bring in the strobes. And the size, we didn't talk too much about the size. I mentioned it briefly. We didn't talk about temperature of light. We didn't talk about incidental light meter reading versus reflective, which is what your camera does inside. So there's what you can do. There's what you can search for to keep learning. Keep learning, keep shooting, and I'd love to do it together. If you want to stay in touch, come join the Facebook group, Imperfect Photography. I do monthly classes through Eventbrite next month, July 23rd, Saturday, same time. I think maybe a tiny bit earlier. It's photo basics, like exposure triangle basics, so manual exposure. And that's July 23rd, 2022, in case you're watching the recording. But, feel free to message me via email with any questions, bridget@bhaggerty.com, and I'm bhaggertyphoto on Insta. I'd really love to see you in the Facebook group, and that's where you can also stay in touch about any new courses that I'm going to do, whether it's a 1-hour class or more long form, which I am hoping to release by fall of 2022. All right, thank you so much.